Reverend Bill Marchiony.
All right.
Thank you. Good morning. So delighted to be here, and so glad that I'm at no risk of getting frostbite today. The topic of today's talk is right judgment. Show of hands, has anybody in the room ever had an experience being in judgment? So what does this term, right judgment, mean? Because we spend all of our lives with our spiritual friends saying, oh, you're so judgmental, and being told that we shouldn't be in judgment in any way. And yet here's this idea of right judgment. So there's a dichotomy that's going on here. And is it necessarily so bad to be in judgment? So I run a teen program, and actually a teen group that stretches from Albany to Washington, D.C. I have about 150 teenagers who I've been working with for 5 or 6 years. And I would say that every one of them and all of the advisors, and certainly I, during my teenage years, found myself, or they found themselves at some point sitting either in the principal's office or in their parents' living room with somebody wagging their finger saying, I'm very disappointed. I expected better judgment from you. My friend said I shouldn't be judgmental, so what's going on with that? In fact, I was reading the Bible, and in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus actually said, judge not, lest ye be judged. Lest ye is Old English that means unless y'all have the same thing happen to you. It's what goes around, comes around kind of thing. They use lest ye because it makes it seem scriptural and more authoritative and more pious. So judge not lest ye be judged. So we shouldn't be judgmental, and yet here's dad or the principal or whoever it is saying that I should have better judgment. So what's going on with that? And then in the other version of the Sermon on the Mount, in the book of John, I'm still reading the Bible, it's really great. I haven't gotten to the end, so don't tell me how it comes out. He says, judge not by appearances, judge by right judgment, or righteous judgment. My friend Karen has a litmus test for sensibility. She has a couple of dogs, and she noticed that when you make a high-pitched or a funny noise, the dog goes like this. And Karen noticed the same thing happening to her. When something weird showed up in her life, she'd go, oh. So she termed that the doggy head tilt test, and it works for me as well. You might feel it at a different place in your body. But something comes along that doesn't quite resonate, like, judge not lest ye be judged, but judge with right judgment. You go. The teenagers actually have a phrase for that. It's WTF. And I checked, and I'm told that means, whither thine philosophy? Again, from the Old English. So judge not, lest ye be judged. Judge with righteous judgment. Where's the balance point? What on earth are we talking about here? Well, I had an experience where I had an opportunity to get into judgment about 6 months ago. I got thrown out of my church. And I gotta say, I had some feelings about that. In fact, there was the opportunity to get judgmental about all sorts of things, organizations, people, etc. But the fact of the matter is, if I'm going to teach this teaching, I gotta live by this teaching. So I went back to what the teaching is about. And the teacher of teachers, Curtis Hopkins, who was a teacher for, taught the people who founded Unity, taught Ernest Holmes who founded Science of Mind, Divine Science, and all sorts of other people. She had a great saying. She said, this too is good, this too is God, this too is for me now, and I demand to see the blessing. And when you say that, you're actually saying, I demand to see the blessing. Because there are times when there's that opportunity for judgment that we don't see the blessing, that there's no possible way to see the blessing. And it turns out that this is not a new story. This has been going on for, there's a story from ancient China about a man who goes to visit his neighbor. And he's just checking up on his neighbor who's a farmer. And he says, so what's been going on? And the farmer says, well, last night my corral fence broke and my prize stallion escaped. And the man says, oh, that was such a wonderful horse. What bad news? And the old farmer looks at him and says, bad news, good news, who can tell? And the man looks at him and tilts his head and thinks, what a divine philosophy. And he goes off and he does what he's going to do. He comes back a couple of days later to check up on his friend, the old farmer. And he says, please tell me what's happened. And the farmer says, well, interestingly, the stallion came back last night and he brought 3 wild mares with him. And the man is beaming, he's delighted. He says, oh, that's good news. And the old farmer says, good news, bad news, who can tell? Because in a lot of cases you can't tell. And there was a difference between the judgment that one was labeling the experience with and the just being in the experience that the other one had. There's a story about a sports reporter who gets assigned to cover a major league umpire camp. Apparently the umpires get together and they have their own preseason camp and stuff like that. They talk about, umpire things where you can buy unattractive gray slacks. So he decides that he's going to do a story about how in the split second that the ump has to call the pitch, he decides whether it's a ball or a strike. So he gets to camp and there's the rookie who's just come up from the minor leagues and it's his first day at umpire camp. He's really gung-ho and really enthusiastic. So the reporter takes out his notepad and goes over to the guy and says, when that ball's coming in 90, 100 miles an hour, and you only have a split second to call it, how do you decide whether it's a ball or a strike? And the young guy says, it's really easy, I just call it like it is. I jots that down. It's okay. I'm on board. And that's his job. His job is just to say that it's a ball or it's a strike. And he needs to be there. And his job is to be in judgment. So he's the one who's got to decide what it is. Everybody else is participating in what's going on. But what he's doing is he's labeling it as either a ball or a strike. So as I was thinking about doing this talk and about being judgmental, I realized that I had a pretty good resource in my family. My sister-in-law is a juvenile court judge. And it turns out that every once in a while people accuse her of being judgmental. And kind of goes with the territory. So I got in touch with Leora and I said, how do you, between judging and being judgmental? And her answer, even though she's part of civil service and she's working for the government, she's part of the judicial process, was very spiritual. What Leora said is, when she's listening to a case, she's monitoring herself at the same time. Because it's really easy for her, when she's listening to a case, to get involved personally and have her own issues and her own stuff come up. So she knows that that's going to happen. She can't train herself to never think about herself, but she's aware when it's happened. She knows that those are the times that she's getting into being judgmental. She's bringing her own issues in. And she needs to put that aside so that she can be fully present for the case that she's hearing. Because what she wants to do is make a value judgment rather than to make a personal judgment. Okay, back to umpire camp. The reporter decides, well, I'm going to talk to an ump who's been doing this for a little bit longer, not just the newbie, because it'll make a better story, especially, Fox News. If we can get them to argue with each other, then there's the story.